Hello everyone, peace be upon you. Before we begin, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe, and stay with me until the end of the story. Also, leave a comment telling me which city and country you're watching from. I'd love to see how far my story has reached. For those of you who have already subscribed, I sincerely wish you good health, ease in all your affairs, abundant blessings, and may all your hopes and dreams come true. Amen. Now, let's begin the story. The sun rolled up over the dry flats outside Fort Brenton Military Academy, turning the dust in the air a weak gold. Trucks idled by the main gate, engines humming while fresh recruits climbed down in stiff uniforms and new boots that hadn't met Texas grit yet. The place smelled like oil, polish, and fresh paint on barracks that had seen 1,000 mornings just like this. Ryan Calloway stepped out first from his truck, squared his shoulders, and scanned the yard like he already belonged here. He was 20, lean and wired, still wearing that high school quarterback confidence as if it were part of the uniform. Mark Benson dropped beside him, half a step behind like always. "Looks bigger online," Mark muttered, adjusting his cap. Ryan smirked. "It's all routine. We'll crush it." Across the parade ground, a figure moved at an unhurried pace. Sergeant William "Bill" Archer. He wasn't tall, and he didn't try to fill the space with noise. His uniform looked older than everyone else's, the fabric softened by years of use, but every crease sat exactly where it should. On his left sleeve, a faded patch with silver thread, Spectre Recon Unit. Most recruits didn't know what it meant. They noticed the wear, not the weight. "Check the museum piece," Ryan said under his breath. A couple of nearby recruits snickered. Archer set his cap on a bench, brushed a thin line of dust from his jacket, and raised one boot to a small brush. Short strokes, even pressure, quiet focus. He aligned his belt buckle as if he had all the time in the world and none to waste. Lieutenant Samuel Grant stood near the flagpole, clipboard tucked to his ribs, eyes tracking the new arrivals. He didn't correct the laughter. He just watched who joked, who copied, who listened without being told. When Archer walked past, Grant gave a small nod. Archer returned it, barely a motion, then moved on, scanning the rows like he was checking a map he knew by memory. "Fall in," the corporal barked. Lines formed, crooked first, then straighter. The morning heat was already working on them, shining on brows and turning collars into sandpaper. Archer stopped in front of Ryan's line. He didn't shout. "Heels together. Chin level. Breathe through your nose." The line tightened a fraction. Ryan stared straight ahead, jaw set. He didn't like being corrected in a voice that calm. They moved to drills. Push-ups, planks, short sprints that felt longer than advertised. Archer didn't pace like a metronome. He flowed through the gaps, adjusted a wrist here, a stance there. "Discipline isn't noise," he said to no one in particular. "It's repetition." Mark heard it, filed it, and tried to keep his breathing from rattling. By mid-morning, the yard was a chorus of boots and short commands. Ryan kept checking the older sergeant out of the corner of his eye. The man kept the same pace as the kids without raising his voice or breaking his line. When a recruit stumbled on the run, Archer matched stride, set a hand near the shoulder without touching, and said, "In through the nose, out through the mouth." "Don't fight the pace," said it. The kid finished the lap. No celebration. Just a nod. Hydration break. Ryan leaned into the shade, wiping sweat with a sleeve. "He polishes like he's meeting the president," he said, just loud enough for Mark to hear. Mark shrugged. "Maybe that patch means something." Ryan snorted. "Everything means something around here if you ask the old guard." Archer sat on the bench again, same quiet routine, cap, jacket, boots, the patch. He brushed the silver thread with a small cloth, not a flourish, just a habit. The recruits clustered under the awning carried on their whispering. Grant glanced over from the flagpole, expression flat. He had trained under Archer years ago. He knew what the patch was. He knew what not talking about it meant. "On me," Archer said later, voice steady, and the squad circled. "You'll get loud instructions from loud people. You'll also get quiet standards that never change. Learn both." He pointed at the bleachers. "Line inspection at 1600. Your gear will reflect the time you gave it." He paused on Ryan. "Time given is character shown." Ryan held the stare for a beat longer than he should have, then looked away. Afternoon heat pushed into the concrete. Weapons safety orientation, field strip basics, reassembly. Archer's hands moved with a rhythm you could copy if you watched close enough. Ryan tried to beat the clock, jammed the spring, and had to start over. Archer didn't sigh. Again. Mark finished just behind Archer's demo. Archer tapped the receiver. "Good. Clean edge." Evening crept in, taking the glare off the yard. The flag came down. Some recruits laughed again, softer this time, because they were tired and laughter was a pressure valve. Archer remained under the old floodlight near the benches, brushing his boots until they caught the dim glow. Ryan walked by, slowed, thought about saying something, and didn't. In the barracks, bunks groaned, lockers clicked, and the air filled with low talk. Mark leaned back on his pillow. "You think he ever gets mad?" Ryan stared at the ceiling. "He'll need more than a patch to impress me." He said it like he meant it, but it didn't land as clean as earlier. Outside, Archer stood alone under the flagpole, hands behind his back, eyes on the rectangle of sky between buildings. He adjusted his sleeve, smoothed the fabric over the Spectre Recon Unit patch, then rested his palm there for a second, like he was checking a heartbeat no one else could hear. He picked up his cap, put it on with care, and walked the line of the dark yard like he had promised someone he would. Grant stepped from the shadows near the admin office. "Good start," he said. Archer nodded once. "They'll learn." He didn't add how or when. He didn't say from what. The base settled into the usual metal creaks and far-off generator hum. Recruits drifted toward sleep, too proud to admit the day had moved them an inch. Ryan turned on his side, watching the window. Somewhere out there, the old sergeant kept that quiet routine, same order, same pace. Ryan told himself it was nothing. Routine was just habit. But the base felt a little different than it had that morning, like the ground had shifted half a step. He closed his eyes and tried to hear only his own breathing. In the corner, Mark whispered, "Inspection tomorrow." Ryan didn't answer. He was still thinking about a patch he said didn't matter and a voice that didn't need to shout to be heard. He was still thinking about that patch and that quiet voice when the bugle ripped open the dawn and threw every bunk into motion. Boots hit the floor. Lockers slammed. The chill in the barracks air turned into hot breath and hurried hands. Ryan laced up fast, squared his cap, and told himself today he'd set the pace for everyone else. Outside, Fort Brenton was all steel edges and hard light. Lines formed quicker than yesterday. Grant moved down the rows with his clipboard, eyes sharp. Archer stood 10 yards out, hands behind his back, like the yard itself reported to him. "Formation," he said, level and calm. The lines tightened. Ryan lifted his chin just a fraction too high. Warm-up rolled into sprints. Ryan jumped out front early, cutting corners with small glances to make sure no one saw. Archer saw. He didn't bark. He pivoted once and matched stride near the inside line. "Tag the cone," Archer said without looking at him. Ryan clipped the cone with 2 fingers the next lap, heat rising in his face. Mark pushed by, steady and honest, and didn't say a word. Push-ups, mountain climbers, hold and breathe drills. Archer moved through them like a metronome built from routine. When a recruit's hips sagged, he tapped the air below the belt line. Straight. When breathing turned ragged, he said, 4 in, 4 out. No drama. No speech. The corrections stuck because they were simple and right. Mid-morning, the intercom cracked. All units, command visit. General Richard Holloway on base in 72 hours for full inspection. The yard shifted. Jokes shut off. Head snapped toward Grant. He didn't smile. You heard it, he said. Gear, bearing, standards. Everything counts. Ryan felt a jolt of excitement. Inspections were scoreboards. He liked scoreboards. 3 days, he muttered to Mark. Plenty of time to bury the curve. Mark glanced toward Archer. Or plenty of time to mess it up. They went to weapons tables. Field strip, wipe, reassemble. Ryan hammered the steps fast, trying to beat Archer's cadence. Spring jumped. Pin rolled. He lost 10 seconds chasing metal across the mat. Archer didn't move to help. Time spends the same whether you rush or not, he said. Buy what you can use. Ryan locked the receiver and got it right the second time. Archer nodded once and moved on. Chow Hall buzzed with the news. Someone said Holloway was brutal about belts and boots. Someone else swore he noted thread fray from 20 feet. Ryan leaned back like it didn't worry him. We shine. We pass. Easy. Across the room, Archer ate in silence and finished before most of them. He left his tray the exact same way he found it. Afternoon brought uniform prep. Steam irons hissed. Polish turned black cloth to mirrors. Ryan worked his boots hard, checking his reflection in the toes. He caught Archer outside under the awning, running the small brush along the same slow path. Cap down. Jacket across the knee. Fingers pausing on the Spectre recon unit patch like a habit with a reason. The sun made a dull flicker on the silver thread. Ryan looked away first. Grant posted the inspection schedule on the board. Squad times. Route. Notes. If you think the general won't stop at you, assume he will, Grant said. If you think he won't ask a question, assume he will. When in doubt, act like the standard is watching. A couple recruits laughed a little too loud. Grant waited them out. The room got quiet on its own. Before lights out, Archer ran one more walkthrough. Button alignment. Collar gap. Belt line. Don't perform for the inspection, he said. Perform for the uniform. The inspection just tells on you. He stopped in front of Ryan, checked the buckle, then lifted his eyes. Less shine, more posture. Ryan felt the sting and set his shoulders without arguing. Night pressed across the yard. The flag came down smooth. Barracks buzz settled to a low hum. Mark sat on his bunk, sliding a cloth along his boots. He gets in your head, he said, half a smile. Ryan tossed his rag into the locker. He's just another sergeant. It sounded thin even to him. He lay back and stared at the ceiling. 3 days. He pictured Holloway, the line, the pause, the verdict. He pictured Archer's hand on that patch, steady and sure, like there was a story stitched into it that made everything slower and clearer. The quiet bothered him because it didn't push, it pulled. It made noise feel cheap. Somewhere outside, Archer's steps tapped a slow loop around the parade ground. The base lights threw hard angles across the concrete. Ryan shut his eyes and tried to sleep, but his mind kept replaying the day in short clips, the cone he'd faked, the spring he'd lost, the nod he'd earned without a word. He told himself the inspection would sort it. He told himself shine was enough. Still, the last thought before he drifted was the same one he'd avoided saying out loud. He needed to know what that patch really meant, so when lights out settled and the barracks quieted to a low, even hum, Ryan slipped from his bunk and eased into the hallway with his boots laced but silent. The admin wing kept a night light on over a corkboard of schedules and old photographs, faces he didn't recognize in uniforms that looked heavier somehow. He kept moving. The records room door had a lazy latch and a glass pane clouded with age. He pressed it open, stepped inside, and breathed paper and dust. File drawers lined the wall with stamped labels: training, personnel, commendations. He found the older section and ran a finger along the tabs until Archer, William caught in the slit. The folder wasn't thick, but it wasn't thin either. He opened it on a metal table under a buzzing fluorescent and skimmed: service dates, postings, a handful of citations without fanfare. Halfway down, a page clipped at the corner: Afghanistan, Cedar Ridge Offensive, Operation Silent Ridge. His pulse ticked up. Spectre Recon Unit, the header read. Language crisp, unemotional. Mission parameters redacted. A line near the bottom: personnel, classified. Outcome, partial success. Casualties, heavy. There was a commendation: 2, valor under fire, actions enabling extraction of wounded, refused evacuation until last man accounted for. Ryan swallowed. The words were dry, but they hit wet. He imagined a valley at night, flare light tearing up the dark, Archer carrying weight that breathed and bled. He imagined the patch given not as decoration but as a receipt. The door hinge whispered. Ryan snapped the folder closed and turned. Lieutenant Grant stood in the frame, shadow cutting across the floor. He didn't ask what Ryan was doing, he looked at the folder like he already knew. Done reading? Grant said. Ryan set the file back in the drawer and slid it shut. Yes, sir. Grant nodded once. Then make sure what you read changes something other than your bedtime. He let the door swing open and stepped aside. No lecture, no threat. Just the kind of sentence that sticks or doesn't based on who you are. Back in the barracks, sleep came crooked. Ryan stared at the ceiling and replayed the words: refused evacuation. Last man accounted for. The next morning landed harder. The bugle was sharper, the air drier, the ground more honest. On the run, he didn't cut corners. At the cone, he planted his palm dead center like it mattered. Archer clocked it without a word. Through the day, the yard wore a new rhythm. Ryan mirrored Archer's economy: smaller motions, cleaner lines, fewer wasted breaths. When a recruit lost a screw at the weapons table, Ryan found it under the mat and slid it back with a short, lock your thumb, like Archer would. Mark noticed and said nothing, which meant he noticed. At chow, the rumor mill spun around the inspection. Holloway asked Dr. Numbers last time. He caught a crooked seam. He bounced a whole platoon for a scuffed heel. Ryan ate quiet, eyes on the seam of his own sleeve. He caught Archer at the far table, alone, posture at ease but nothing sloppy. The patch sat in the open, not hidden, not flaunted. Just there. Afternoon drills pushed into navigation basics. Archer handed out compasses and maps of the training grid just outside the wire. Camp Echo, he said. 2 miles east. Get there as a unit. The map is right unless you read it wrong. The compass is right unless you think you're smarter. Ryan led his fire team onto the trail and, for 10 minutes, let confidence steer. The sun sat where he wanted east to be, the brush led where the ground felt friendly. 15 minutes later, a drainage cut them off, water glinting like a quiet dare. Mark raised an eyebrow. Echo isn't over a creek. Ryan checked the compass. It disagreed with his gut. Boot steps crunched behind them. Archer appeared like he'd always been there. He didn't smirk. He pointed with one finger at the ridge line. North. Your bearing drifted with the path, not the needle. He held Ryan's eye a beat. You can be certain or you can be correct. Then he stepped back and let them solve it. Ryan reset the azimuth, called the pace, and this time kept the needle honest. They reached Echo with sweat in their shirts and a lesson in their bones. By evening, the yard cooled and shadows ran long. Inspection -2 days. Grant posted a checklist outside the barracks: belt center, gig line straight, collar roll, boot shine, bearing. This isn't theater, he said to the knot of recruits crowding the board. It's a mirror. Ryan worked his gear in a slow loop, boots, buckle, buttons, then sat on his bunk and stared at the patch he didn't have. He thought of the line in the file and the quiet in Archer's face when he walked the night loop. Lights out trimmed the noise. Mark rolled to his side. You good? Ryan nodded. Yeah. He waited a second. Grant caught me in records. Mark snorted softly. And you're still alive. Ryan almost laughed. He said to let it change something. Mark's voice stayed low. Then change it. Outside, Archer did the same route he always did, past the flagpole, along the edge of the parade ground, under the glow that made dust look like snowfall. He stopped once and pressed his palm to the patch like a check-in. Ryan watched from the window and, for the first time, didn't think museum piece. He thought map legend. He lay back and counted breaths. 4 in, 4 out. Tomorrow he'd fix the seam he kept pretending was straight. He'd tag every cone. He'd keep the pace for someone else if he had to. The inspection would still come, and Holloway would still be Holloway, but Ryan felt the ground under him different now. Not softer, truer. He didn't plan to say anything to Archer. There wasn't anything to say. He just planned to show it, and the chance came at a bad hour when Fort Brenton was supposed to be asleep. The siren didn't ease in, it knifed the dark with a keening wail that sent bunks clattering and bodies scrambling. Fire, West Hangar, the intercom cracked, and the night turned orange through the barracks windows. Ryan hit the floor, grabbed his blouse half-buttoned, and met Mark in the aisle. No jokes. No swagger. Just motion. Outside, heat rolled across the parade ground like a living thing. The West Hangar spit flame from its seams, smoke punching up and flattening under the floodlights. A fuel hiss carried under the roar. Grant came at a run, radio to his mouth, eyes white in the glow. Then Archer was there at the center line, not running, not strolling, moving with a pace that made everything else line up. Extinguishers. Buddy pairs. Nobody moves alone, he said, voice level, and the panic bent around it. Ryan and Mark ripped 2 red canisters from a rack and followed Archer's hand signal to the south door. Metal groaned. Sparks sprayed like hornets. Watch that roof line, Archer said. If it talks, it's coming down. They stayed low. Smoke clawed at their eyes and throats, turned the breath into a thing you had to catch and hold. Archer pulled the door bar and it stuck. He slid a pry bar from a hook, set the bite, and nodded to Ryan. On 3. They heaved. The seal tore. Heat punched them. A shape stumbled out, a mechanic, coughing blood into his sleeve. Ryan yanked him clear, shoved him into Mark's hands. Medics. East side. Archer pointed left. 2 more inside, locker row. Keep your line. They pushed through the doorway, shoulders to steel like they were holding the building up with their backs. The hangar stank of burning rubber and hot metal. Light strobed from emergency beacons and the fire's own pulse. Stay on me, Archer said, one hand out to the left, not touching Ryan but keeping him close. Breathe through cloth, he added, and Ryan pressed his sleeve over his mouth, counted a 4 count in and out because that was what the voice had taught him. They found the first worker wedged against a tool chest, eyes wide, feet tangled in a cable. Ryan cut the cord with a box blade, threw the man's arm over his shoulder, and hauled. Archer took the weight for 3 steps without asking, then gave it back, gauge quick. You've got him. Go. Ryan didn't argue. They passed the doorway into cooler air and handed the man to hands that grabbed and went. Back in. No speech about bravery. Only the map and Archer's head moving their feet. A sheet of roof buckled and dropped a stripe of molten debris. Archer shoved Ryan sideways and took a shower of sparks across his shoulder. He didn't flinch, he just turned his face from the blast and checked the beam with a glance like he could feel the load through his boots. "We're okay," he said. Left aisle, then cut right. The last worker was behind a jammed locker door, pounding weakly. Archer braced and pulled. Nothing. Ryan set his extinguisher down, wedged the nozzle into the seam, and used it like a lever. The latch screamed and gave. The man slid out and collapsed. Archer lifted him under the arms and almost smiled at Ryan's improvised pry. "Good," he said, and they moved. The path out shimmered under heat. Ryan heard the fuel hiss rise a note. Archer heard it too. "That sound means we're done here," he said, and they were. Outside, the wind shifted and threw sparks across the tarmac. Engines idled heavy as crash trucks hammered foam into the mouth of the fire. Grant appeared through the chaos, grabbing quick counts from squad leads and feeding them into the radio. "All accounted?" he asked Archer. Archer scanned the line, the doors, the shadows, the places a scared man might try to hide. He looked back at the hangar, at the way the flame had settled from animal to hard work. "All accounted," he said, and only then let his shoulders drop a fraction. Ryan sank to a knee, forearms on his thighs, lungs sawing. Mark dropped beside him and let out a laugh that wasn't a joke, just a release. "You good?" Mark asked. "I will be," Ryan said, tasting metal and ash. He looked at Archer. The sergeant's sleeve was scorched, the edge of the Spectre patch darkened, the silver thread catching stray light like a steady pulse. Archer noticed the damage and brushed it once with 2 fingers, not precious, just aware. General Holloway arrived fast, convoy lights bouncing off the hangar's skin. He didn't bring ceremony. He walked straight to the foam line, watched the crew blanket a last tongue of flame, then turned. "Report," he said. Grant started with numbers. Archer cut it clean. 2 injured, conscious, handed to medics. No missing. Fire contained to West Bay. Holloway looked at Archer's face like he was checking for a lie and found none. He nodded once. "Good work." He didn't smile. He didn't need to. The noise retreated in layers, siren off, pumps down, radios quieter. The yard smelled like wet ash and engine heat. Archer set his extinguisher upright, wiped his palms on his trousers, and took a step back to see the whole picture, as if he needed to file it where it belonged in his head. Ryan walked over, stopped, and stood a respectful distance like he was approaching a memorial. "Sergeant," he said, voice hoarse. Archer spared him and shook his head. "Hydrate. Check your buddy. Debrief in 20. Not unkind. Just the order of operations, the way he kept chaos from leaving tooth marks in tomorrow." They formed a semicircle by the flagpole while foam steamed on the far side of the lot. Archer talked them through it the same way he taught them to breathe. Perimeter first. Entry controlled. Keep pairs. Listen for the building. If it talks, you listen louder. He pointed to the south door. "Good leverage, Calloway. You used what you had." Ryan nodded, surprised by the small credit feeling heavier than any shout. Holloway and Grant stood off to the side for a minute, voices low. When they stepped in, the general didn't grandstand. He looked at the recruits, at the scorch on Archer's sleeve, at the patch. "I've seen men freeze when it counted," he said, even. "You didn't." He gave Archer a single, tight nod, the kind that travels the whole yard. Then he left them to the night. Lights returned to normal levels. The base remembered to breathe. Mark bumped Ryan's shoulder. "You showed it," he said. Ryan glanced at the hangar and then at Archer, who had already moved to check the far corner where shadows pooled. "No," Ryan said, not bitter. "He showed us how." He took a long pull from a warm canteen and felt the shake leave his hands 1 inch at a time. Later, when the hoses were coiled and the foam crusted to a dull skin, Archer walked the edge of the scene alone, the way he always closed a loop. He paused near a warped locker, reached inside, and pulled a half-burned photo that must have lived there for years. He folded it small and slid it into his pocket over the patch. Ryan saw from a distance and didn't ask. Some things didn't need words. Some things were receipts. The night settled uneven but quiet. The inspection clock kept ticking, 2 days now, and the base felt older in a way that didn't show on a schedule. Ryan crawled into his bunk smelling like smoke and effort. He stared at the ceiling until he could hear only his breath. 4 in, 4 out. He didn't rehearse a speech for tomorrow. He didn't plan to be the fastest at anything. He planned to stand where he needed to stand and make sure no one got left behind. And the next morning, he did. The sky over Fort Brenton came up a hard gray that made the parade ground look like it had been scrubbed with steel wool. Recruits formed early without being told. Boots sat in perfect rows under bunks. Belts split buttons cleanly. No one talked loud. The yard carried a quiet that didn't feel empty, it felt ready. Ryan took his spot in formation and found the line through his spine like Archer kept saying. Mark settled beside him, shoulders level. Grant moved down the ranks with his clipboard, tapping a seam here, nudging a chin there, saying almost nothing. Archer checked his squad one last time, fingers quick on a collar, a sleeve, a buckle. When he stopped in front of Ryan, he didn't adjust anything. He just held the look a second and gave a tiny nod that hit heavier than a speech. Ryan set his heels a fraction tighter. Engines rolled through the gate. The convoy parked short of the flag. General Richard Holloway stepped down first, big frame, steady eyes, uniform that knew how to sit on a man without wearing him. Colonel Whitmore followed with 2 inspectors. Grant called the yard to attention. Silence fell in neat lines. Holloway started at the far end, boots clicking a slow, even count. He didn't rush. He took in faces, gear, bearing. He asked a private to quote a regulation. He told a corporal to fix a tiny thread on a cuff. He moved like a man who had done this 1,000 times and knew exactly what it meant. Sweat gathered under collars, not from heat but from awareness. When he reached Ryan's row, the world narrowed. Holloway stopped in front of him, eyes level. Name, he said. Private Ryan Calloway, sir. The general looked him over, then pressed a finger to Ryan's belt line. Centered. Good. No smile, just the smallest release in his jaw. He moved on. Then the line sent a ripple that had nothing to do with wind. Holloway had stopped in front of Archer. For a long breath, he didn't speak. He just studied the left sleeve where the Spectre Recon Unit patch sat faded and honest. Something in his face changed, not softer exactly, but known. You still wear it, Holloway said, voice low enough to make the yard lean in. Yes, sir, Archer replied. Holloway gave one nod, then turned so the formation could hear him without him having to raise his voice. Recruits, you see this patch? He let the moment settle. Spectre Recon Unit. Cedar Ridge Offensive. Operation Silent Ridge. A mission that asked too much and got more than it deserved. Most didn't make it home. He looked back at Archer, then at the lines of newer faces. Some did. And they brought back standards you don't clap for. You live them. The yard didn't move. Some stomachs dropped. Ryan felt heat creep up his neck that had nothing to do with the weather. He saw the hangar flame in his head, heard the fuel hiss, felt Archer's hand steer him past falling metal. He heard Grant's line, let it change something, echo in a clean, hard tone. Holloway stepped one pace closer to Archer. I read a report years ago about a sergeant who refused evacuation until the last man was out. It didn't mention his voice, or the way he walked a yard at night, or how he taught kids to breathe through a fire. Reports never do. But they noted the outcome. He turned back to the formation. Outcomes are built in small, boring choices you make every day. He returned to inspection mode like a switch. The rest of the pass went quick. He stopped twice to point out a cuff and a scuff, then signaled Grant to form the unit by the flag. At ease, he said. Not casual. Shoulders dropped a half-inch. This base faced a real test last night, Holloway said. 2 injured. No dead. Fire contained. That's not luck. That's training that stuck when it hurt to remember it. He met Archer's eye again and let the silence do the introduction. Sergeant Archer's leadership under pressure will be entered into the record. Archer didn't shift. Make it the unit's record, he said. Holloway's mouth twitched like that answer landed where he expected. Noted, he said. Grant stepped forward with his clipboard, voice crisp. Inspection results, commendable bearing, improved uniform standards, deficiencies minor and corrected on the spot. He cleared his throat. Squad Archer, outstanding cohesion. A few heads tipped toward Archer's line, then back to front like they hadn't moved at all. After dismissal, the yard didn't explode into noise. It breathed out. Recruits turned to each other and made small fixes without being told. Ryan wiped a fingerprint from Mark's buckle. Mark checked Ryan's seam and didn't find a thing to fix, which made them both stand taller. Near the flag, Holloway talked with Whitmore and Grant in short lines that sounded like decisions. Archer didn't hover. He moved to the edge of the formation and watched his squad do the work themselves. Ryan walked over, not too close. Sergeant. Archer looked up. Ryan didn't give a speech. Thank you, he said, simple. For last night. For this. Archer studied him, saw what needed to be seen, and nodded. Keep it, he said. Don't rent it for inspections. Ryan felt that land somewhere permanent. Word spread fast but quiet. Guys who'd mocked 2 days ago picked up trash without being told. Someone straightened the guidance stand that had never been perfectly square. In the chow hall, trays set down softer. No one acted like saints. They just acted like they were part of something that didn't need to be announced to be real. That evening, the sun fell clean and took the edge off the concrete. Archer did his loop, same pace, same corners. Ryan and Mark walked the opposite arc once, not to follow but to share the air that felt different now. Near the benches, Archer paused and thumbed a small burn mark at the edge of the patch. He didn't polish it away. He left it. Grant caught Ryan on the way back in. Records room, he said, deadpan. Ryan waited for the hit. You let it change anything? Grant asked. Yes, sir. Good, Grant said. Now prove it again tomorrow. He kept walking. Lights dimmed. The base slid toward sleep like a machine easing to idle. Ryan lay down without the old buzz in his chest. He wasn't trying to outrun anyone or outshine a mirror. He counted 4 in, 4 out, and thought about how a belt sits, how a hand finds a shoulder, how a voice can carry a whole yard without cracking. He didn't picture medals or speeches. He pictured a patch that was never for sale and a standard that didn't care who was watching. He closed his eyes knowing the story had shifted for all of them, not because a general said it out loud, but because a quiet man had already lived it where no one could see. Tomorrow would be drills and sweat and small choices again. That was fine. The lesson had a place to live now, and it wasn't going anywhere. It lived in small choices that didn't make noise. It lived in how they lined up before the bell, how they checked each other's gear without acting like heroes, how they listened when a calm voice told them to slow down and get it right. Fort Brenton felt different in a way you couldn't take a picture of. It was in the air, steady and plain. Morning came up clean. The hangar was a black scar across the west lot, taped off and quiet. The rest of the base moved like a drill they finally understood. Ryan woke before the bugle and sat on the edge of his bunk, lacing up slow, counting breaths. 4 in, 4 out. Mark rolled over and grinned. Look at you, old man. Ryan shook his head. Just trying not to be dumb. They laughed once, low. Then they got on with it. Grant had the squads on the grass by sunrise. No speeches. He pointed, they moved. Archer paced the back edge, eyes making small checks the way a mechanic listens to an engine. When a recruit's heel drifted, Archer flicked 2 fingers. When a chin crept high, he tapped the air. He said almost nothing. He didn't need to. Chow was quiet, too. Trays down, quick bites, no drama. Ryan caught Archer at the end of a table with an empty seat across from him. He took it without a plan. For a minute they ate in silence. Then Ryan said, "Sarge, yesterday mattered." Archer kept his eyes on the table a beat, then looked up. "Then do something with it." Ryan nodded. "I will." That was it. It didn't need polish. Afterward, Grant pulled a few for remedial marksmanship. Ryan stayed to help without being asked. He watched a kid punch the trigger and miss right, then stepped behind him. Slow press. Front sight. Don't chase the shot. The kid corrected on the next round, startled by his own center hit. Archer saw from the shade and gave that small nod that counted as a paragraph. By midday, the pace eased. Paperwork happened somewhere. Trucks came and went. Holloway's convoy had already rolled out with Whitmore, dust whispering behind them. The base exhaled. Inspection over. Fire behind them. Training still ahead. In the afternoon, Archer called his squad to the bleachers. He stood on the dirt and let the wind do the extra talk. "You did well," he said. "Not because you were perfect. Because you were honest." He let that sit. Standards aren't about being watched. They're about what's left when the noise shuts off. He looked down the line and let his gaze land where it needed to, one by one. Keep each other straight. Nobody finishes alone. He dismissed them and walked the perimeter like always, hands behind his back, boots quiet. Ryan and Mark drifted toward the fence and watched him trace that same square he traced every day. Mark said, "You think he ever gets tired?" Ryan thought about the scorch on the patch, the half-burned photo he'd seen Archer pocket, the way he wouldn't let the burn mark be polished out. "Yeah," Ryan said. "He just doesn't hand it to us." Near evening, the wind changed and brought the smell of cedar from beyond the wire. The sky over Texas turned the color of old brass. A maintenance crew stacked bent metal from the hangar into neat bundles. Ryan joined them for an hour and didn't make a thing of it. He hauled, wiped sweat, stacked straight. When he finished, Archer was there, not close, not far. "Good work," he said. 2 words. More than enough. Back in the barracks, lockers clicked and quiet talk ran under the hum. Mark leaned on his bunk rail. "So what now?" Ryan shrugged. "Same thing as yesterday. Do it again." He glanced at his boots. They were clean, not glass. He straightened his belt, not for a mirror but for himself. He thought of Grant in the doorway of the records room, of the line about letting it change something. He thought of Holloway's voice when he named the patch, and the way the yard went so still you could hear your own breathing. As lights dimmed, Ryan stepped outside for air. The parade ground lay empty, lines faint where feet had drilled them into the dirt. Archer stood by the flagpole with the rope in his hand. He lowered the flag slow, folded it clean, and set it in the case. When he turned, he saw Ryan and paused. For a second, the yard felt like a hallway with no walls, only a straight path you could walk or not. Archer tapped the patch once with 2 fingers. "Remember what lives here," he said. Ryan didn't ask which "here" he meant, the cloth, the base, the space between your ribs. He just said, "Yes, Sergeant." Later, with the barracks settling into the usual creaks, Mark mumbled from his bunk, half asleep. "You still want to be the fastest." Ryan rolled onto his back and watched a rectangle of streetlight on the ceiling. "I want to be the one who keeps the pace," he said. "And I want to make sure we all cross." Mark gave a sleepy thumbs up. Cheesy. Ryan smiled into the dark. Yeah. Worth it. The days that followed looked ordinary from far away. Runs. Drills. Chow. More drills. But if you stood close, you could see the edges had been sanded to something stronger. Guys tied laces the same way. They counted off and waited for the last voice before they moved. They fixed small things before they turned into big ones. When a new shipment of recruits arrived, loud and bright, the yard held steady. Ryan caught one cutting a corner at the cone and didn't bark. He matched stride and said, "Tag it." The kid rolled his eyes and tagged it anyway. Small choices. Stacked. One night, rain came through, slow and patient. The base took it like a blessing. Archer did his loop in a poncho, head bare to the drops. Ryan watched him from the doorway and felt the old itch to ask 100 questions that didn't need answers. Instead he stepped back inside, checked Mark's locker without saying a word, then fixed his own seam that had started to creep. No inspection would catch it. He didn't want one to. He just wanted it right. Weeks would pass. The hangar would get rebuilt. The scorch on the patch would stay. Holloway's line about outcomes would bend into the bones of kids who used to think loud meant strong. Some of them would leave Fort Brenton for other posts, other dirt, other nights that needed a steady hand. They'd carry pieces of this place the way Archer carried that old photo, not for show, for memory. On a quiet evening before lights out, Ryan took one last walk under the floodlight that made the dust look like winter. He stopped at the edge of the yard and looked back at the benches, the flag, the path Archer walked thin. He thought about the first day, about the jokes that already felt cheap and far away, about the fire, the inspection, the nod. He thought about how easy it is to laugh at what you don't understand, and how hard it is to keep your mouth shut long enough to learn. He headed in, boots clicking once on the threshold. 4 in, 4 out. Tomorrow would look the same and mean more. That was the point. He wasn't chasing a mirror anymore. He was carrying a standard. And somewhere outside, a quiet man with a faded patch kept time for the rest of them without saying much at all.